I mean, for crying out loud, it's just a TV show. I mean, look at you. Look at the way you're dressed.
The genocide that is going on in Gaza right now should be condemned by everyone. There are clear, documented, filmed, videoed, broadcast war crimes that everyone should condemn. There is video of a hospital being bombed and targeted deliberately. In fact, multiple hospitals, but most recently we're seeing patients being burned alive on video. Burning patients alive is a war crime. A patient who is hooked up to an IV is a non-combatant. Killing non-combatants is a war crime. Snipers shooting non-combatants walking down the streets, women, children, old men who are clearly non-combatants, who are clearly just walking down the street and being shot. Children being shot by snipers in the head, and hospital workers, volunteers who have gone over to Palestine, to Gaza, reporting, yes, there were so many children shot in the head. And I was shocked when I was talking to another colleague at a completely different medical site, and she told me that she was also seeing children shot in the head. It wasn't just a situation that was happening in this one location. It is a deliberate targeting of civilians. That is a war crime. Everyone should condemn that. Abusing prisoners. It has now been documented on video. They used their shields to screen out some of the video cameras, but guards at the Sidi Tayman prison detention center in the Negev sodomizing prisoners with metal rods, electrified metal rods according to some reports, but with metal objects and metal rods that perforated their bowels, and they had to be admitted to surgery, and the surgeons could clearly see, yes, they were sodomized with metal rods, and that's what poked the holes inside of their large intestines. And that's been defended publicly by some politicians.
Take your hands off our reservists, like it is in the prison service, so it is in the IDF. Our fighters deserve full support.
It's being defended. Everyone should condemn this. The rape of prisoners is a war crime.
שיש מי שבפרקליטות חושב שאפשר לבוא ולעצור חיילים על דברים שעושים למחבלי נוח'בה, לא נגמר. אנחנו לא יכולים להמשיך כרגיל.
להכניס מקל לרקטום של בן אדם, זה לגיטימי?
כן, אם הוא נוח'בה, הכל לגיטימי לעשות לו. הכל.
הכל.
עבירה, חשודים בעבירה של אינוס, בעצור כפות. זה לא מעניין אותך?
בגדול, עוד פעם, זה מעניין לי את העכוז מה עשו לאיש חמאס הזה. אני כל הזמן זוכר, קודם כל, הדבר היחיד שמבחינתי הוא בעיה פה, זה שזו לא איזושהי מדיניות מוסדרת של המדינה להתעלל בעצירים. כי בגדול, זה גם, קודם כל מגיע להם, וזה אחלה נקמה שאנחנו צריכים לתת להם. ודבר שני, אולי זה גם ישמש אותנו קצת יותר כהרתעה.
I went to the United States Military Academy. I went to West Point. We were taught what is a war crime. Shooting non-combatants is a war crime. Shooting prisoners of war, even in a field environment, is a war crime. We watched, everyone who went to West Point in my era knows the movie Break 'em or Rant. We had to watch it multiple times. It's really a condemnation of the, if you watch it closely, it's a condemnation of the British Empire and the corrupt British officers who left the Australians out to dry after the British officers issuing criminal orders. But we were taught you cannot shoot prisoners. We were also taught you cannot tolerate rape. Rape was a death penalty offense. When I went to West Point, we went through the entire Uniform Code of Military Justice, Manual for Courts Martial. We went through case by case, offense by offense. We looked at every single offense in the manual and learned about, this is the maximum penalty for this offense. This is the minimum penalty for this offense. And when I went there, this was in the year 1987, my first year at West Point, the page for rape, the maximum offense was death. That was listed in this manual for courts martial in 1987. Now we could debate as to whether rape should still be a death penalty offense. Certainly in the case of child rape, it should be a death penalty offense. Maybe. We could debate that. But it was a death penalty offense right when I was going to West Point. That was changing over from being a death offense to a life offense. But everyone should condemn the burning of hospitals and the killing of hospital patients still attached to IV lines in horrific scenes of burning alive, the shooting with snipers of unarmed non-combatant women, children, non-combatant men. That's a war crime. You can't shoot a non-combatant male. Even if he was just a combatant a few minutes ago, once he's a prisoner, he's a non-combatant. You can't shoot him. And you can't rape people. That's a crime. Everyone should condemn this. And if we aren't, then we're morally bankrupt. Biblical literalists who aren't condemning this are showing their moral bankruptcy. Biblical literalists, Christians, used biblical literalism to give space to give room for the genocide, the absolute slaughter of the Native Americans. The genocide of the Native Americans, the genocide of the Australians, the absolute elimination down to very small pockets of survivors and remnants in North America, Australia. Those are all historical examples of the moral bankruptcy of biblical literalism. The Crusades. When you point these things out to modern day biblical literalist Christians, they say, oh, well, that was in the past. That was an abuse. That was twisting the Bible. We don't believe that anymore. Oh, really? Well, we wouldn't support that today. Oh, really? Let's look. Where's the biblical literalist Christian magazines that are condemning this widely? If you look at Christianity Today, this is, a week after we're seeing images of patients being burned alive in hospitals or attached to, makeshift hospitals, basically medical tents being targeted and burned alive. Do you see anything on the cover of these Christian magazines, the premier American Christian magazine or the premier UK Christian magazine? No, it's what should we do about Russell Brand or something like that. That's what they're concerned about right now. The genocide that is going on in Gaza right now, it's being enabled by literalism. It is being given space by biblical literalism because there are literalist Christians who believe that the state of Israel is somehow a fulfillment of the Bible or a return of the children of Israel from the Bible to their land, that land belongs to them. Those are Bible stories. Bible stories are just stories. And pointing that out is not anti-Semitic. Bible stories are just stories. The figures in the Bible are based on constellations, and I have proven that. But even non-literalists, people who don't take the Bible literally, generally have been brainwashed into believing, well, that is the land that belongs to the children of Israel, and therefore the modern state of Israel is somehow a fulfillment of returning the people to their land. Those are stories. Those are just stories. And this is where I have a particular angle on this. Everybody should be condemning what's going on, as I do. Everyone should be. But some people believe, oh, well, that is the land that belongs. No, it's not. The stories in the Old Testament, it's called the Old Testament, but by the way, those stories were collected up into a canon after the New Testament. So they're no more ancient than the New Testament stories. These are all ancient myths. They are from the ancient times, from the Roman period, the Hellenistic period, let's say. The Old Testament stories are just stories. So are the New Testament stories. I'm allowed to say, I believe Jesus is a myth. If you're offended by that, well, that's that's too bad, but it doesn't make me bigoted to point out that you cannot justify what you're doing by biblical literalism. Well, Moses is also a myth. I can prove that Moses is a constellation. I can prove that Jesus and his 12 disciples are constellations. I can prove that the stories of the Bible are based on the stars. They are just stories. You cannot excuse or base policy on the Bible stories today any more than you can base them on Greek myths. You can't say, well, I'm justified in doing this because of something that I read about in a story about Heracles or Hercules fighting the Nemean lion or the Hydra and taking those literally. You can't use Mahabharata of ancient India as modern day excuse for anything. You cannot use the myths. I can't say, well, you know, I'm descended from the god Poseidon, god of the sea, so I get that surf spot and nobody else does. And I'm going to kick everybody else off of that surf spot. And anyone else who hangs out at that beach, I can shoot them and bomb them because I'm descended from Poseidon. You can't do that. They are stories. The Bible stories are stories. But even non-literalists seem to accept what they're being told about them. Oh, well, it's the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. No, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are constellations, and I show that. You can read my books, you can watch my videos, you can take my online courses where I go story by story, including through the stories of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and show that they are myth. They're based on the stars. They have beautiful, powerful, profound things to teach us, but they are not literal. They are stories. It's just like Star Trek. Star Trek is stories. There's a very famous Saturday Night Live skit with William Shatner where he goes up in front of a Star Trek convention and he starts saying, it's just a TV show. Get a life.
Something I wanted to...
It's so famous that later he made a movie called Get a Life, or a documentary about his life, and he called it Get a Life. It's funny because, look, it's fun to take Star Trek literally and pretend, but it's pretend. And I'm sorry if it insults anybody, but Star Trek is just fiction. I love Star Trek. I grew up watching Star Trek, the original Star Treks. I've got them all on DVD, but they're just fiction. The Matrix is just fiction. What if we had a movie industry that claimed, hey, everything that we make in these movies is real, and you might be insulting someone if you point out that it's not real. It's not real. Star Trek is not real. The Matrix is not real. Star Wars is not real. The Truman Show, Jim Carrey didn't really live inside of a big dome and be on a TV show. It's fiction. And it shouldn't be wrong to point that out. And people who get offended if you point that out, well, okay, then get offended. But Balaam did not ride on a talking donkey that stopped in the road and crushed his foot against a wall because of an angel. Samson didn't kill 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of an ass. The jawbone would wear out, number one. And number two, after he killed one or two of them, he would grab a sword or a weapon off of one of the people that he killed and use that instead of the jawbone. And Samson didn't, in one night, collect up 300 pairs of foxes and tie their tails together. Those are stories. They're based on the stars. They're not literal. And I don't think too many people today take the talking donkey literally. Or that Sarah had a baby after the age of 80, literally. And yet, what's going on in Israel is being enabled by a form of biblical literalism. The people who take the Bible literally, to their great shame in moral condemnation, are supporting it, some of them. You've got groups like Christians United for Israel saying that what Israel is doing is blessed by God because of the Bible. It's being enabled by literalism. But it's also being enabled by quote-unquote literalism among just the general public who don't take the Bible literally, but have been brainwashed into thinking that some of it really is literal. Yeah, those stories about the descendants of Abraham and Jacob, the children of Jacob, they really did live there. No, it's all stories. It's just like Star Trek. And you cannot give space to modern day war crimes with literalism. And that's the unique angle that I bring to this argument, in addition to the fact that everyone should condemn this. Everyone should also know that these stories are just stories. Go watch Celestial Bible Tour Part 1, where I go through story by story, starting in Genesis and going up through the flood and going up through children of Jacob. I go through the story of Abraham and his 2 wives. I show that it's all based on the stars. Celestial Bible Tour Part 1, Celestial Bible Tour Part 2 picks up with the children of Israel and goes on with Moses, the story of Joseph, and stories in the Judges, and ends up with David and Solomon. They're all constellations. They're all stories. They're profound stories. They're powerful stories, but they are not literal history. And it's provable that they're not literal history any more than the movies that you see today. Oh, and by the way, somebody will say, but what about October 7th? It turns out that a lot of what we have been told about October 7th is demonstrably also a fiction. A lot of the atrocity stories were a fiction. There's a new video that was released a year later on October 7th, 2024 called Atrocity Inc. that shows quite clearly that many of those stories about beheaded babies and were fiction. We've been told a fiction. I'm not saying that there weren't atrocities that happened, but a lot of the atrocities that we were told are a fiction. You cannot excuse the genocide that's going on, the sniping, the rape with fiction. You cannot excuse it. And to the extent that biblical literalists are not condemning it, it exposes the lies of biblical literalism. The Western civilization that was built on the hijacking of ancient texts, I've talked about this before, the hijacking of ancient texts and the installing of biblical literalism was built on a demonstrable lie, demonstrable falsehoods. Those Bible stories are not meant to be taken literally. They weren't taken literally in the ancient times, and then biblical literalism came in and hijacked the West and stamped out the ancient understanding of the myths. And to that extent, from that point on, the West was built on lies. And the lie that Christ gave the whole world to Christians, that's been published in the Doctrine of Discovery. The whole world is given, that's why they hold up a globe with a cross on top of it. That is a symbol of the lie that, the whole world belongs to Christianity. And Israel belongs to the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Those are lies based on a fraudulent, deliberately fraudulent misinterpretation of the ancient myths. And it can be shown that it was deliberate, by the way. So it was built on lies. That civilization built on lies, to the extent that it's built on lies, those lies are going to come unraveled someday. It is coming unraveled right now. The bankruptcy of that is being exposed. And if you're not rising up and condemning what's going on, then that's a problem. We need to all rise up and condemn what's going on and demand that it stop. And to the extent that the people of the United States are demanding that the U.S. stop this U.S.-enabled genocide, it's a problem. And to the extent that the leaders of the U.S. are enabling it against the will of the people, that clearly shows you don't have a democracy. But to the extent that you've got a large group in America that are giving it space because of biblical literalism, that needs to get fixed, because there's absolutely no justification for the horrific atrocities that are going on right now. Burning hospitals, shooting non-combatants, raping prisoners, and abusing prisoners. Those are all war crimes. And to the extent that they're U.S.-enabled war crimes, everyone in the U.S. needs to be demanding that the U.S. stop enabling it.